and a little excitement too on our part, Judy, because this week is when the EPARTRADE platform went live for the first time 3 years ago. So it's our little
exactly 3 years.
Yeah.
Yes, congratulations to you and the team. I will raise my hand and say I thought this was a really great idea when you shared it with me. Brilliant and well done to you and both of you for your dedication and perseverance to bring this forward to the world.
Thank you very much, Paul. And yes, you were one of our first supporter and believer, and we thank you so much for that. And I'm getting a signal from Reed, our producer. I think we're going to be bringing Jeff Swart on right now, who's going to be hosting this panel with you, Paul. And so this is the second time we're going to have Megan with us to talk about Pikes Peak. She was part of a panel back in December during Online Race Industry Week. This is a race that for me has a special place in my heart because I grew up watching Ari Vatanen, and when I saw that Peugeot going up that hills, that was just a revelation for me. So I'm a huge fan of that race. Hello, Megan. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me. And I'm here with Fred V. Chartner, I'm chairman of the board as well, and multi-year racer.
Excellent.
On Pikes.
Welcome, Fred, and good morning, Jeff. So,
thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So, Mr. Fanner, you're in charge, and we'll let you guys take over for the next hour, and we'll see you in about 55 or 58 minutes.
Thank you very much, Francisque. And hello again, Megan, and nice to meet you, Fred.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, and I suspect you know the rascal on the screen with me here, Jeff Swart.
Unfortunately, we do.
Yeah. Well, it's great for us all to be here, and obviously, I know what I know about the Pikes Peak Hill Climb from my friend Jeff, and it's been central to his life. I think he's been there 18 times and won 8 times, and most recently and most frequently in Porsches. And hello, Jeff.
Hello. Good to be here. And our connection, Paul, and my connection goes way back, and certainly centralized around racing. And one of my earliest assignments in the publishing world was with Road and Track magazine to cover a race in Colorado, and I'd never been there before, and this would have been in the early 80s. And I certainly, once I was up on the mountain, found it to be a place like no other place and a race like no other race. And here all these years later, I feel the same way. So it's pretty special.
Indeed it is. In the Broadmoor Pikes Peak Invitational Hill Climb, brought to you by Gran Turismo, it's 99th running here, and it's the month of June. It, to me, is Le Mans and Pikes Peak, and Pikes Peak is one of the most unusual and important motorsports events in the world, and its enduring appeal is magnified in this age of spec racing cars and, if you will, commodified competition, where it's manufactured motorsports. This is authentic, pure motorsports adventure at the highest level. And I think, what I'd like us to get into today, and please feel free to shove me aside, because I think all of you know a lot more about this than I do. I've only been to Pikes Peak once for the event, and I was blown away by what I saw. You're coming up on your 100th running next year. And in this post-pandemic era where we're seeing a massive surge in motorsports interest, I mean, we're seeing it on our platforms up over 100% in traffic, just massive sharing, and people want to get outside and want to, breathe fresh air and be around motorsports. I want to start with what makes this so special for all of you, and please just chime in. I'd like to know why you're all involved.
Megan, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll start a little bit. I started with the organization 10 years ago, and I have just, as Jeff mentioned, Pikes Peak is a very, very unique event. Logistically and operationally, it is like nothing else. We don't own our racetrack, so everything that we put up must come down. But to answer your question, Paul, the one thing that I think keeps me going and drives me every year to put on the best race possible for our spectators, media, and competitors is just the fact that it is so unique, and the competitors genuinely get one shot at it each year. And, you know, we do as an office as well. We have one shot to make it the best we can. We try to make improvements year after year, but it's really the competitors with one chance, one run once a year. And there's nothing else in the world like it.
It's also an interesting blend too, of blend of professionalism to grassroots in motorsports. And, you know, I think to maybe demonstrate that is to, you know, I'll be sitting there in practice and ahead of me is Romain Dumas, who has just finished racing at Le Mans literally the week before for a brand like Porsche that, you know, obviously I'm very close to. And behind me is a guy who's just ripping it up the mountain in a BMW that his passion has been to run Pikes Peak someday. And he built it, you know, in his garage and had his friends help him and crew it with him. And that blend is so amazing. And even to be on the mountain with somebody like Ray Everham, who's known to be for being a crew chief. I mean, the winningest crew chief in NASCAR history, I think. And yet he's there on the mountain to race too. So that blend of people all on the same road, same weekend, everything is totally unique in motorsport.
Well, I echo that. I joined the board about 13 years ago, found out at the first board meeting that the hill climb was basically broke. It was in danger of just folding because it was being put on by a bunch of racers who, with all due respect, probably don't make good board members. I decided to run for the first time, and I've been racing since I was in my 20s, just because I thought it looked like a lot of fun, which it is. And for some stupid reason, people agreed to sponsor me. Jeff knows it's a hook. It's such a unique event because the weather conditions change every day. The road conditions change. The last 2 or 3 miles have frost heaves. Those heaves change, so your line changes. And it's just the ultimate challenge of you against the mountain. Yes, you're competing against other people, but it's really about putting it together for one consistent, quick run. You have 156 chances to mess it up to get to the top. And it's there's such a camaraderie among the drivers. Jeff mentioned this, but the first year I ran, Romain pulled me out of the car to congratulate me on my run. I mean, you don't see that in other events. And then lastly, you mentioned this. We in Bonneville are the last 2 races where cheating is encouraged. I mean, our classes are pretty broad. And if you could, Jeff, I know I shouldn't say that, but the reality is, we're live, okay. The reality is, if you can figure out how to make your car go faster within some fairly broad rules, that's great. And yes, we have rules, and yes, we have scrutineering, but it's largely for the safety aspects. And of course, we try to keep everything within a range, but we don't have a BOP. You know, if a guy can figure out a faster way to make Audi go up the hill, do it. And that's special.
Indeed it is. And you know, I think that there's an appetite for that in this world of sameness. And there's an appetite for motorsports to be an adventure where you don't know what's going to happen. And your opponent is yourself, and in this case, the mountain. That transcends everything else. And it's a metaphor for, you know, our lives, basically, you know, climbing as fast as you can go, as far, you know, to beat your own record and also to beat a record. So we have, you know, these 12.42 miles that are now paved, 156 turns and an elevation of 14,115 feet. You know, that, you know, is something that probably is locked in now, not going to change. You don't have the issue of paved and unpaved. And what is the record now? Ultimate record for that mountain?
I'm not Jeff. We maybe have to help. It's Romain Dumas' record right now.
Yeah.
The Volkswagen 4ID electric car, and it was 7:43, I think.
Yeah.
A phenomenal time. Phenomenal time.
We should be able to pull that off the top of our heads.
You know, it's one of those things. It's a personal place, and you know, I look at, and as Fred mentioned, you know, you go there. Maybe even to back up a little bit, if this road that we get to drive on once a year was laid out on flat ground, this road, if it was laid out on flat ground, it would be the most fascinating, most interesting complex of turns available in motorsport, from hairpins to sweeping turns to long straightaways to decreasing radius. Every type of turn almost in motorsport would exist in this course if it were to be laid on flat ground. You combine that with the fact that it starts, at, almost 9,000 feet to go up from 9,000 feet and finish at 14,115 feet up the side of a mountain with the spectacular views, not that you're looking at them, but that combination of things. But if you were to purely look at the road laid out on flat ground, it would be the best road you've ever driven on in your life. So the combination of things together really creates a dynamic that is, as a driver, it's the part that makes me come back every year. And I think that, as Fred said too, you're really racing against the mountain. And to position this mountain in the whole United States, it literally lies on the Continental Divide. And so that everything to the east falls off into the open plains. So the mountain pointing up, and it's an interesting mountain once you know where it is. On almost every flight you make across the United States, you can see it because it really does sit on its own. But because of its placement near the Continental Divide and opening up to the open plains, it really kind of creates what we all kind of understand in racing terms. It creates a vortex and it sucks all the weather past it and moves past it. So therefore, that mountain, there has 12 months a year that it snows at some point. It has 4 seasons, hopefully not always on race day, but inevitably on race day, we seem to get almost all 4 seasons. And the things that you go against as a driver is obviously the complexity of the road, but at the same time, it is your own self. You personally have to race the mountain. And I think that when you talk to drivers who have made it to the summit, there's such a feeling of kind of conquering something personally. And I think that side of it is really special because, racing is so much racing against people and diving under them and taking advantages and being, in a position to take different corners differently during a race and all this. But this is really a personal, challenge to yourself. And Paul, you and I, nurtured and helped a company for a long time, which was No Fear. And the tagline for No Fear was face your fears, live your dreams. And I mean, that's really what Pikes Peak is about, to face your fears of everything that road offers you, but live your dreams by getting to the summit.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Jeff. And I wanted to add too that Richard Vincent on our chat has put in 7 minutes, 57 seconds, 0.14.
Yeah,
we just
got
pulled
it.
it up.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And Paul, to hit on that a little bit, I know you were asking about the record. So just thinking through my 10 years with the organization, when I started, it was a huge feat to break the 10-minute mark. So we had everything in our, we were all like, if you could break the 10-minute mark, if you could break the 10-minute mark. And so we had a list of the 10-minute men is what we call them. And then time passed and people were starting to, jump under that. And then when Loeb was here, when he smashed the previous record, I think it was 8:13. But then we all thought, that's it. Can't go faster. He had perfect conditions. It was a perfect day. Everyone, including us, that's not going to be broken in our lifetime, blah, 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 blah.
He'd been here for 3 weeks, driving the hill every day in a Camaro, absolutely looking at the course. And
wow.
Loeb's got to be one of the great drivers in the world.
He is,
and Peugeot took their Le Mans engine and a big budget and came over and were testing and brought other test drivers with them to run other cars and get data. I mean, after Sebastian set that record, it was like, well, that's never going to be fast. It can't be done. Yep. So,
and then when Volkswagen came in to put their $1 million effort in to try to break the record, I remember having early conversations with them. And obviously it was a play for Volkswagen as an organization to springboard their whole campaign of moving to electric vehicles in the next 10, 15 years. And I remember saying kind of off the record to my staff, like, whoo, Pikes Peak is a lot of eggs to put in your basket. I mean, that is going after that record and just because as Jeff was saying, Pikes Peak can throw anything at you, and the mountain decides, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
Volkswagen could have had everything set and everything ready, and they could have been, and something one-off could have happened. A deer could have ran out on the road. I mean, you name it, it'll happen. So that's what was so crazy about the leap from Loeb's record of 8:13 down to Romaine's.
Well, you bring up an interesting point here, which I was going to get to when I originally asked the question, is that we have this event that started in 1916. And, you know, my first exposure was, I think it was on Wide World of Sports, I believe that I saw it when I was a 9 or 10 or 11 years old with my dad, watching it on TV. And my dad had, you know, grown up in part of his life in Colorado, been involved in midget racing when he was younger. So he knew a lot about it. And it was really tied into the kind of USAC National Championship scene and the AAA scene. The people from that world were part of it. So we've come from that to living on the very edge of the future and the adoption of new technologies that will drive mobility going forward in this century, being demonstrated on the mountain. You know, you can do literally anything here. And does the appeal of it as a proving ground for future technologies or as a validation for existing racing programs? You know, what is to stop you from bringing a Le Mans prototype, a NASCAR Cup car, or with a hybrid power, or in the future, or an Indy car with a hybrid power to run up the mountain? Is there anything that prevents that?
Yeah,
Nothing. And this year, in fact, Bentley is coming up with a new biofueled engine with Reese Millen driving, trying to set a record. Yep. Jeff was up there last weekend when that car was testing. And Jeff, why don't you address it? Very fast car.
Yeah, you know, it's like Fred says, Bentley is experimenting with this new fuel that Porsche is helping develop. It's been in the news a bit, and just even the complexities of it. Yes, it's an amazing mountain, but the complexities of climbing to this altitude and the demands on the engine. I mean, we talk about the demands on drivers, but demands on engine and drivetrain, but primarily engine and engine management is pretty phenomenal. And maybe to put that into perspective, in 2010, I came to Pikes Peak to run a Porsche Cup car. Now that Cup car, and this is kind of general calculations that Porsche did, that Cup car at sea level has 450 horsepower. At the starting line of Pikes Peak, it had 375 horsepower. And at the summit, it had 285 horsepower. Yeah. So that is pretty phenomenal loss of power, but that's what happens going to altitude. Now, turbocharging comes along and turbocharging starts to make up for that. But nonetheless, the engines have to work hard to develop that kind of power. And when I think about the car that I ran here in 2015 that had, we probably ran it between 750 and 800 horsepower at the wheels. That car is essentially working at the summit as if it had over 1,000 horsepower. That's how hard everything is working on it. So the demands from the cooling side and developing the horsepower and everything else is pretty phenomenal. And engines, modern engines are so sophisticated these days that, you know, it's a bit like dominoes. When you change one thing, everything else starts falling. So there's a lot of things to look after from an engine management standpoint. And that's why those technical people on the mountain that are just looking after your engine management, and especially in these major programs that come and run at Pikes Peak, are some of the most important people on the mountain, because they're able to then adapt and adjust everything in the complexities of the motor to operate, not just with horsepower at top, but even to run. I mean, there's been, you know, there's times when even modern cars at the summit won't start up there because it just is a different fuel mixture and air mixture and everything else in it. And the complexities also run through braking and through aerodynamics. You'll see this year, especially the Bentley and the Porsche Club Sports that are running there, they have massive wings relative to the type of wings they run in traditional road racing, just because there's less air to go over the wing and air surfaces to create downforce. So every step of the way, is so difficult. And if you're a pilot, you know, you're kind of required to wear oxygen over 10,000 feet when you're in an airplane. Well, you at Pikes Peak, you're at 14,000 feet. So most of the drivers these days have a bottle of oxygen inside the car that they're getting fed as they go up to the summit. And, you know, all of these things are outside the box of the normal things we consider in racing.
That's fascinating. And I have to ask you too, when you're organizing this event, how many competitors do you have? We'll talk about four-wheeled for a minute. I have some other questions of the other categories beyond that, but how many do you have in terms of entrants that are part of this invitational event?
Sure. Well, that has changed a little bit over time. Obviously, last year with COVID, it was slightly different. This year we have 60 competitors, and that's about our sweet spot. You know, I think the board and the race committee, we really are focusing on quality over quantity. And logistically too, there's only so much space to pit the competitors. There's only so much space for them at the summit. So I think right around anywhere between 50 and 75 would be our ideal numbers each year. We do have a selection process and a selection committee. And, you know, we have quite a few competitors that enter every year that are turned away if we don't think that their racing experience is up to par. And then typically we do have a wait list if people drop out, that sort of thing. So it is really prestigious, and it's turning into more of, again, we want the times overall from the first to the last to just shrink. Like that's the goal. We want to make this the best race in the world with the best machines in the world with the best competitors in the world. And we're getting there over time. So this year we have 60 planned right now, Paul.
And how many classes do you have for four-wheeled vehicles?
There's 6.
6 total divisions.
And could we, I'm going to remind everybody that to follow the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and visit the website PPIHC.org. And I'll remind you again, I think if you're a race fan, you know, that the question I have, is this live streamed?
Yes.
Yeah, we are live streaming it this year. And as you can imagine, just think if you were to go out one day and climb a 14er or go on a big hike and you were leaving your house and, you know, you talk to your spouse and say, well, I don't know when I'll be back. I'm not sure if I'm going to have service up there.
Yeah.
That doesn't change when you're on Pikes Peak. So when we talk about, you know, the issues that the competitors have as far as challenges and everything Jeff went through, imagine trying to network a 14,000 foot mountain that you don't own. So it is a huge challenge, and it takes a village to pull it off. And I'm really proud of how far the live stream has come. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect because again, we're on a mountain, but there's about 25 really, really smart people that are working on it and year round. And to be fair, already the network build has started up there. So yes, there will be a live stream, and we're excited about it. And we're excited that we've figured out the technology to make it happen. But it is continually to be one of the, even as technology improves, it's really, really hard to live stream this bad boy.
One year we had a producer come up and they do extreme sports, and they said, this can't be difficult at all. And the marmots ate the cables connected to the cameras.
There you go.
The cameras failed on the course. And then we have Rocky Mountain sheep that came and pushed all the hay bales over the side so they could break in and eat them. I mean, the challenges you have on Pikes Peak to put a race on are unlike any other course. It takes about 300 plus people race day on the mountain to pull this thing off. And so to Jeff's earlier point, there's such a camaraderie. We have generations of people who are third and fourth generation families who work for this race. This is a race of passion. Yeah. This is something that everybody who's involved really wants to be involved.
Well, it shows. And, you know, I have to say too, thank you to both of you for nurturing and preserving this iconic event. You know, having experienced it when it was a mix of paved and unpaved road surface, you know, one of the most profound memories in all my, 49 years of motorsports was seeing, Ivan Stewart go by in a Toyota, I believe it's a pickup truck at the time, with these twin vortices that went 35 feet in the air following him coming out of the tunnels as he went by at about 100+ miles an hour. And it's a spectacular thing to see in person. How do we access the live stream as a fan or somebody who wants to watch this?
Sure. Due to our partnership with Mobile One, it is going to be live on the Mobile One Facebook page. Starting at 7:30 a.m. is when we'll take the green flag, and that is on June 27th. So coming up real quick here.
Well, that's great. And then a couple of other questions here to kind of give background. You know, with the going to a digital reach now, do you have any metrics on how big the kind of global reach of this event is, and how many how many people access it, and what is the social media imprint of this event globally?
Sure, it's really hard to pull out the exact ROI on those sort of questions because we do have such an international following. The growth of our social media over the last 10 years has been huge, especially if you look at last year, for example, because we didn't have spectators on scene. I think one of the things that is the most unique about Pikes Peak is the imagery and the photography, because there's such a juxtaposition between nature and motorsports that collides all at one time. And you could be at Devil's Playground on a practice day morning and you're above the clouds, and it's quiet, right? It feels almost not real, out of a movie, and then all of a sudden
1,000 horsepower car comes by without any attenuation of the sound. So we do track it. We have a group called Meltwater that tracks every article, every input, and it's millions and millions and millions, depending upon countries and coverage. It's not uncommon for us to have 10, 15 international entries every year. This race draws, Jeff can attest to this, draws some of the best drivers in the world just because of the personal challenge. Right. You know, it transcends everything that all of us in motorsports have wanted to do. And again, one of my sponsors one year said, this is where Formula One meets Woodstock. It is just, you just have to be here to appreciate what it's like. And Jeff made the comment, you can be behind a factory effort, but you only qualified 3 seconds behind them because you figured out the hill a little bit better than the guy who's getting paid lots of money to run it. And it's unsurpassed in motorsport.
And Paul, to answer your questions too, what Fred was talking about tracking, I think we average over the last 3 years, let's say 6,000 editorial articles written about the event. So that does not include social. That doesn't include mentions. That's literally editorial news articles written about the event. And that's an average over the years. So, and again, those are from all over the world, which is crazy. It's not just our local newspaper here. I mean, they come from everywhere. So this really is a worldwide international event.
And as you know, I travel a lot for my own business and travel all over the world. And it's really interesting that I can be in Asia, almost anywhere in Asia and anywhere in Europe. And you can mention this one race, this one mountain. And if they're at all a racing fan, it's really on their radar. And if anything, for many years, I think that's changed lately, but certainly in the 90s when I was racing here, it was more, there was more awareness overseas for Pikes Peak than there was in the United States. And I think that, the way it's evolved and everything, it really has a relevant place in the world of motorsport, because we shifted from an interest in IndyCar and various forms of track racing to people being fascinated by the rally scene, and the rally scene was played out once a year at Pikes Peak, and those kind of things kind of linked a lot of things for the enthusiasts and kind of put Pikes Peak on the map. And I just have found that the other side of it is such a wonderful place, as Fred mentioned and Megan mentioned, from the visual sense. I mean, we're maybe a little spoiled here because we live within the mountains for the most of people in Colorado, but even when any morning I'm up there and watch that sunrise up there, it's spectacular. And yeah, as you mentioned too, Paul, Ari Vatanen's film Climb Dance, put this race on the map for the whole world because it was just so visually stunning of a Peugeot racing up the mountain and sliding sideways and roosts of dirt and everything else, that it has that natural built-in attraction because it combines the performance of automobiles that people are attracted to, but also the pure visual beauty of what the Rocky Mountains are about. And that combination leads to great marketing opportunities, great sponsorship opportunities. And as we say too, the social media footprint just gets that much bigger because of the visuals that come out of this. And fortunately at Pikes Peak, we have amazing photographers and cinematographers that visit with us every year, especially the kind of official photographer of Pikes Peak being Larry Chen, who's one of the great talents out there, who documents this race year after year and sends out images that people are just blown away with. So that attraction goes even way beyond the racing.
Well, you led me to the other part of this, is that the beauty of this event is conveyed by the filmmakers and the photographers is one of the differentiating attractors. It in terms of it literally, as it, forgive the pun, it's at the pinnacle of motorsports aspiration or ambition because of it being this beautiful thing that you do when you ascend this beautiful mountain. And as we're looking forward to motorsport in this century, the fact that there's also an opportunity for this to be a proving ground for environmentally friendly technologies. We have an supposedly environmentally friendly technology with electric vehicles. I know there's some debate about batteries and the creation of the battery, but that will no doubt be resolved over time. But you do have this format that's welcoming to all forms and all powertrains. Where do you see this event going as the world changes? How do you see it evolving?
Well, there's no secret that EVs are going to become very prominent in the world, in the nation, and on Pikes Peak. I think that is definitely going to be the future, but I don't think that gas-powered vehicles will be going away anytime soon. I think it's going to be this. I think it's going to be a real testament and a real battle to see as both develop what will continue to show itself on Pikes Peak. But we would be naive to think that 10 years from now the EV competition on Pikes Peak will not be at the top of its game.
Yes, with all the manufacturers moving that way, it's certainly, one would assume that. Yeah.
We've actually had inquiries now on hydrogen powered vehicles, and we would welcome that. Mm-hmm. I over the years, Paul, and you mentioned watching the truck. I mean, over the years, the cars have changed as the technologies changed, and that's true. David Donner, who lives here in town, he was the first one to run a car with fuel injection, and everybody looked at that and said, "Well, what's that?" And they did it from their IndyCar experience. So, we are a proving ground. We welcome that. We work closely with manufacturers who want to come and prove themselves on Pikes Peak. We have records that can be set, and we, much like Nürburgring, Jeff's been talking about this for years, but we want to encourage manufacturers to come and showcase their new technology. Yeah. And they are. Acura ran their supercar the first time on Pikes Peak.
And to that point, it's really so open for this sort of thing because it's not a series. It's not something a manufacturer has to go to a sanctioned body and then plan on competing in 10 or 15 events. It's a one-of event. So the ability to come into it, showcase something very special is pretty unique there, but it's also so open to it. And like Megan said, at one point there was only this 10-minute club, and now we're, in the 8s and everything. So this ability to build something very special for a special purpose allows people to innovate in a different way that maybe you could in a full racing series.
Well, that's to me the most interesting thing about this is that it's a place where the story you create is your own and it's ownable. And this personal challenge. I have to ask you, Fred, what's your personal best up the mountain? time-wise?
Unfortunately, it's right at 11:01. I've had snow and slush and all that. Jeff knows I was lucky enough to win a time attack class one year, and I was third last year in open. I had modified a street Porsche, which is a dumb idea, by the way. And because I made a rear-wheel drive, they put me in open, and I'm running against very specifically engineered cars for hill climbing. And everybody either screwed up, broke, or did something weird last year. So I came in third. So to the point, you've got to finish. And every year I tell the rookies, because I'm working with Jeff with the rookie program, we have about a 15% attrition rate because it is so hard on cars.
Yeah.
And cars that guys who come here who say, well, I've been racing my car, so I'm just fine, usually leave with their tail between their legs. They just, the car doesn't run. So you've got to get the car up the hill. You've got to get yourself up the hill. I'm sure Jeff has experienced some less than opportunistic moments on the hill, but I've run in the rain, the snow. You've qualifying is important. We qualify everybody based on speed, not by class. If you get a late qualifying time because for whatever reason you didn't qualify well, you better count on looking at the weather radar because it may not be at all what you want to run in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Again, you're driving through multiple weather systems as you're going up the mountain. And I have to ask you, Megan, have you been up the mountain and do you have a time?
Oh no, I mean, I've been up the mountain quite a few times, but no one wants me any part of that. But
she's too good to put in a car.
But Paul, one interesting piece that Jeff and Fred have both touched on that I wanted to hit on a little bit is what also makes this so unique and challenging for the competitors as well as the mechanics and the crew is the way we do structure our practice mornings and our qualifying. So as I mentioned, the competitors get one run on race day. That's the first time in a year that they will have the opportunity to get a full run. Because the road is a toll road that's open to the general public, our practice mornings are in the morning, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before the race. And we start at sun up, which is usually around 5:15, 5:30. It depends on what section the competitors are in. And we break the road into 3 different sections. So we have the lower section, a middle section, and an upper section. So the competitors get as many runs as they can in each section, and then they rotate throughout the week. The qualifying times are based on the fastest run in the lower section. So that's how we then set the run order on race day. But again, that's what Jeff was talking about these mechanics, and that was one thing I think everyone was unsure of with when Romain broke the record was, how is that car going to hold the charge all the way up? Because we haven't seen it go all the way up yet. We see it in the lower section, really fast times, middle section, really fast times, upper section, really fast times. But the competitor has to put the full run together, and the machine has to put the full run together. So I think that's why I've obviously never summited Pikes Peak as a competitor, nor will I. But the camaraderie up there when they do make it is a once in a lifetime for some of these people, and you can see why.
And I want to add, not only is it hard on the driver because you're up at 2 o'clock every morning or 2:15, and then you're unloading in the dark and trying not to run the car over your foot. Unloading, warm it up, get in line, try to get as many runs as you can, and that's predicated on people not running off the mountain or having mechanicals that slow it down. And then your crew is doing the same thing. So by Friday, everybody is just exhausted. It's much more like running a 24-hour race than it is to go to a normal race weekend. And so it's wearing and tearing on the machine. It's really tough on the crew. And when you do well up there, you really owe it to everybody else who was around you, who was supportive. And so there's a greater camaraderie, I'd say, at this race with your crew than you typically have. It just creates relationships.
Yes, and I think the thing that you have here too is the sense that you're conquering something. Even if you don't win, you still conquered the mountain if you get up it. And which brings me to you, Jeff. I mean, converting a street car to a race car is something I know you've done because I rode in your Porsche, your 4-wheel drive Porsche 911 when I visited you in Aspen, and there it went up the mountain a little later on, became a rally car. Can you tell me and the audience kind of the experience a driver has driving up that mountain. We have a question from Sean Cridland about that. We talked about the cars, but what is the driver experience and feel going up that mountain?
Yeah, it's like no other, and we've kind of talked about that already. But I think that what I love is that when you pull up to the line, and like Megan just explained, it's a complex practice time, and the mountain is divided up into thirds. When you pull up to the line, it's your one chance. There's no pit stops, there's no adjustments, there's no coming back on the next lap or anything. It's that one run to the top. And I love that focus that it takes. It takes everything you learned over the last 10 days or whatever you've been up there, everything you've learned, and you put it into that one run. And so that, focus on performing in that moment. And yet at the same time, you're going against the weather, you're going against the car conditions, because keep in mind, not only have you not driven to the summit in one run, your car hasn't. So the heat cycles that you went through in thirds suddenly add up. The first third is the starting heat cycle for the second third, and the third is started the heat cycle after it's come out of the second third. So everything's kind of built up on it. And for me, I'm one of the few people now, I hate to say, that I actually have raced at Pikes Peak in all configurations, meaning starting when it was all dirt to when it was half pavement, half dirt, to now that it's all pavement. And people always ask me, oh, what do you like? Which one do you like the best? And oh, it must be much safer now that it's paved, and all these kind of preconceived notions of it. But, the reality is that in dirt, we rushed the corners, we braked, we rotated the car, and the moment the car goes in the slip in a corner, it's released its energy. That was the way the dirt days were. And once it released its energy in going into the slip, then you drove on the throttle around the corner, rally style. And that was the style we went to the summit. But there were no guardrails, there were no visual landmarks, things like that. Now that it's paved, we're driving to the absolute limit of adhesion of the tires, and braking and everything, turning into the corner. And if for some reason you aren't where you think you were, it is a problem, because it's still just a 2-lane road. So that focus that it takes to deal with all of that is really different. And let alone the fact that in the dirt days, I would regularly run 12.5 minutes plus or minus 15 seconds. And now I'm one of the few people under 10 minutes. And, it's kind of a little bit like watching a movie and fast forward now. It really, 2.5 minutes going faster on exactly the same track is a big difference. But I love that commitment. And there's sequences of corners that I remember from the dirt days that have now been translated to pavement days that I just, you lay in bed at night, you think about it, you think about turning into that, building the sequences together. And the other side of it is, now that I'm coaching for the GT4 Club Sport class, I'm getting to verbally explain and kind of pull back the curtain to my process at Pikes Peak through all these years. And it's really been fun for me, because in some ways it's even opened my own eyes that, oh, I didn't have that part quite right. So I'm ready to go back and race again. So
are you coming back, Jeff, next year then? Huh?
I hope so.
You down.
Well, I'll loan you my Formula Ford, Jeff. It needs someone new to drive it and make excuses for how it turned out. But I have another question from Joseph. I think Wayher is the name. Motorcycles, will they be back for the 100th running?
Paul, that is something that's yet to be determined by our board of directors. After the 2019 event, it was 3 motorcycle fatalities in 8 years. And the board at that time decided to put a pause on the program and wait to see what this race looks like without the motorcycle program. Motorcycles haven't been a part of the race all 99 runnings. They've had their ups and downs, and they've been off and then they've been on. And so the board decided to take a pause, and they were going to reassess it after the 2020 event. Well, obviously with COVID and everything, it was hard to look at last year's event as just without spectators, with a shorter field. It was hard to look at it at its full capacity. And so It is still on pause right now, and the board will be looking at it after this year's race, and we'll make a final determination then on the future of motorcycles after this year's event.
Well, thanks for that. And I think that, when I'm looking at this event and its unusual and important place in motorsport, is there something beyond what you do now that sponsorship or money would transform your opportunity? I mean, credit to Broadmoor, credit to Gran Turismo for being your sponsors, and also credit to Mobile One being a partner and carrying the live stream. But is there another level that this event can go to?
We all think there is. A few years ago, we were able to pave the pits. Prior to that, while it's charming to work under a tree in the dirt, it's pretty tough to launch a serious effort doing that. And we're always looking for not only things that could physically make the race better, but how can we do better? How do we make it more compelling? And here's the good news. All the people who've come as sponsors buy into this race. We're not having sponsors who do a year and then say, well, this isn't getting me what I want. If anything, they're doubling down. And so we think the answer is yes. I think we continually want to make this race better. They're working on the new Summit House, and it will not be completed this year, but it will be for next year's race in terms of the facilities. It will greatly improve the experience for the drivers on top. We work very closely with the architects to see that there's nothing that's going to impede the finish area, and we're straightening out the finish area to make it even safer. I mean, I think the answer is we're all committed to making this race better and bigger every year, and dollars help do that, as you know, in motorsport.
Yeah.
It will help the organization, it helps the competitors. So anything we can do to work with sponsors, make their ROI better, we can do that for all the reasons Jeff mentioned, as far as an effort by manufacturers.
And Paul, to your point, I think what's been really interesting this year is we obviously thought fundraising would be a huge challenge with the pandemic, but our sponsorship reach goes well beyond the three you mentioned. We actually work with is either an in-kind donation or sponsorship over 100 different organizations. It takes a village to put this race on, and whether it's the Broadmoor Gran Turismo or the local Tough Shed that down the street that gives us a Tough Shed for us to store the water in for the VIP tent, whatever it is, we work with over 100 different organizations in some way, shape, or form to help make this race grow. And huge, as Fred said, I think a huge piece of it is a lot of our returning sponsors. They hung with us last year through a pandemic and no spectators, and again, we kind of anticipated maybe losing some this year, but everyone came back with open arms. I think once you see Pikes Peak once you're a part of it, it's hard to walk away.
Well, absolutely. And what I think is interesting about this, as opposed to traditional circuit racing sponsorships or series sponsorships or team sponsorships, you're sponsoring a story. You get to tell your own story in that sponsorship, and you're sponsoring a lifestyle, a mindset that exists beyond the physical event. It's something that stands, above the plane of all other forms of motorsport, literally and figuratively. And taking that story and amplifying it brings me to one of the final questions I have. I have a few more from the people that are watching this, but this was once a televised event. The world's changing. Television doesn't hold the same power that it once did. But have you had conversations with anyone about reintroducing this to broadcast or to one of the larger subscription channels that does these things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an ongoing conversation that I'm having every year with many different groups. This event, even though it's live streamed, and then even though it hasn't been on live broadcast, the number of things that are done post-production, like you said, every competitor has a story. So just imagine every competitor and their journey and their YouTube channel and their social media. And last year we had a phenomenal 3-part series that was on Motor Trend that was post-production. Yeah. So
I saw that.
It continues to grow and grow, Paul. We have I think we have maybe 6 or 7 groups coming up this year looking to do production. We're having large conversations already with groups about next year's event because it's 2022. The live broadcast component, there is plenty of discussion out there. What's a little bit challenging about our event is the, let's say, uncertainty about it. So for example, our event can be anywhere from 8 hours long to 12 hours long, and that's a long time to do a live production. So you could do something, let's say, trim it down to 2 hours, and you could hit the top competitors in the field, and you could have this big plan and have it be on network. And then you have what happens last year, and we have a 2-hour ice delay to start the race. And all of the sudden, those 2 hours are a scramble because there's nothing to show, because we can't run, because there's ice at the top.
Yes, those pesky ice delays,
So there's, like I said, logistically, there's a lot more things than that, but definitely know the long-term goals of this organization are to get as many eyes on this beautiful race as possible.
Well, that's a noble goal, and I think that this really celebrates the original spirit of motorsports. This is a core sample all the way back to the beginning of the sport. Still, this is how it started, with this spirit of adventure and the man and machine against a physical challenge. And I'm so glad that it's still with us. It maybe is becoming more meaningful as it approaches 100 runnings here, and in its second century. So I had a couple of quick questions from the audience. I think it's Jason is asking us here, is there going to be a vintage car run group?
We don't have a vintage run car group per se, but we do have some pretty interesting vintage cars in the race. We have a turbo diesel powered pickup truck that's running, I think, 1,100 horsepower on the hill this year.
Wow.
We think for the 2022, we may bring back, Jeff's working with sort of a champions class. One of the people he's talking to is Bruce Canepa, who ran a Freightliner, and we may have a Freightliner coming up the hill.
I remember that. Yes.
I'm also on the committee that accepts drivers, and we're up for some unusual cars. It's not this year, but we've had a 1939 Cadillac that has a NASCAR chassis under it on the hill. Wow. There's been some cool stuff, and your Formula Ford would fit right in.
Yes, I would probably run it with the new the motor out of the Mach-E if I went up there, but a Mustang Mach-E. But I think the thing I think that's interesting here is you don't know what's going to happen, and you touch on it, Megan, when you're answering the question about broadcast. There's a double-edged sword, but the fact that you don't know is probably the greatest attractor of this event. It's unpredictable in every way. And I personally like seeing the motorcycles on the mountain. I hope there's a way for you to, to me, that's been some of the most compelling things I've seen. But I know you have safety's primary concern of everyone involved. But the motorsports world has something very unique in this event, and I have to say, if you haven't watched this before, remember to follow the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Follow it on race day on the live stream, and tell us anything else that if someone wanted to see the event live, Fred and Megan, what would they need to do?
Well, that is the thing. We are very excited to welcome spectators back on Pikes Peak this year. Last year we felt super lucky to be able to hold the event. We had postponed it, and then we had to pull the trigger on no spectators. And we had it during August when the pandemic was not even close to anywhere over or in the midst of it. And so we talked as an organization. I think last year the easy thing would have been for us to just cancel, right? That's the easy thing to do. But as you mentioned, the history and the legacy of this event goes well beyond what's easy to do. And the only things that have stopped this event from running in the past have been world wars, and we weren't going to let a pandemic stop us. So last year we felt very proud to continue to put this race on and do it in a safe manner with all the COVID restrictions and pull it off. But we were missing our fans, and it wasn't the same. So this year We are welcoming fans back to Pikes Peak. We have no capacity limits outside of the normal capacity limits, which are a highway and parking and that sort of thing. But as far as COVID goes, we don't have any restrictions there. And so our tickets are available online for purchase. And we're very excited to have this race back how it used to be.
That's terrific. And could you let the audience know the days of activity that they can buy a ticket for, and give them that website address one more time? Let's sell some tickets here.
Well, I was going to say, Paul, before we do that, one of the cool things that Jeff hasn't talked about is when you finish the race, all the competitors wait on top until we're released. As you come down, all the spectators come to the side of the road and everybody high fives and slaps your hand.
Wow.
And little kids get a chance. You can stop and they can talk to you and hit your car and do all that. It's really special. It's a real group effort. So as far as tickets, Megan will give you that.
Tickets are available on our website, which is PPIHC.org. And we do sell them by family pack. I kind of hit on this, but we are limited in the number of vehicles we can park at each spectator area. So you do get discounted tickets based upon the number of people in your vehicle. So each ticket gets cheaper depending on if you buy a 6-pack, 5-pack, 4-pack, things along those lines. And then I think camping is almost sold out, but it is the only day you're allowed to camp on Pikes Peak the night before our event. And so we have limited camping passes, and I think we're close to being sold out on that. So I would pick those up sooner rather than later. And then we have our tech inspection on the Monday before the event, if you're here in Colorado Springs, is free and open to the general public as well.
And that's a big event too. That's a really fun happening. So, well, thank you, all of you, for this really fascinating discussion today. And it's great to see you again, Megan. And Fred, good to meet you. And Jeff, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we had you back on, Megan. We wanted to give you a full hour because during Online Race Industry Week, there was a panel. I love the title of that panel, Unlimited or whatever. And that's the spirit of this industry. And Jeff said it perfectly during the webinar, is you almost invited to cheat. It's like you come up with a clever way, just make it as quick as, make that car as fast as possible, bring all the new technology on board. So that's wonderful, and that's what we love about that race. So thank you very much for joining us today. I forgot to mention that we were actually live on racer.com and on Facebook live as well, and the webinar has been recorded, as well as the first part with Giant Finishing. We'll be posting both recording on the EPARTRADE platform later today. They will be promoted as well on YouTube, social media. We'll provide it to you, Jeff and Fred and Megan as well, if you want to use it too. And thank you very much for joining us today. We will be back next week at 9 o'clock for another episode of Race Industry Now with Bestline. And we're going to be talking Diamond Nano Lube products for motorsports. So if you're Pikes Peak competitors, there is some really cool things being done on Diamond Nano Lube, and you might want to use those products in your car next, in a few weeks, Jeff. So please join us. Thank you very much for being part of today's program. That was the 105th tech webinar we produced, and this one was co-produced with Racer and a wonderful team that Paul runs at racer.com and Racer Magazine. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Registering on EPARTRADE is easy. Fill out your name, email, phone number, and create a secure password. Next, select your business type. Choose supplier if you're looking to display products or services and connect with buyers. Choose racing business if you're looking to find new parts and connect with suppliers. Choose race team if you own or are a member of a professional racing team. Begin typing your company name. We most likely already have your company in our database, which you can select from the drop-down. Then, enter your job title. Choose Claim Company if you'll be editing your company profile. Other members of your company can choose Join Company if they'd like to use EPARTRADE as well. You can view and agree to our terms of use here. If you'd like to receive our weekly newsletter, choose Accept. Click Register Now, and your registration will be submitted for approval. You'll need to confirm your email once it goes through. To keep our platform industry only, you'll be approved shortly after. If we require additional proof of business, we'll reach out. Welcome to EPARTRADE.